Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. For those of you joining me for the first time, my name is Melissa Reed, and I'm a mixed media artist from Pennsylvania. So today I'm doing something that I don't often do, which is start a project with an idea in mind. I am typically an intuitive artist, which means I kind of just start and react to what's going on, but I've been having this series in my head of collaged pieces with simple ink drawings on top. So that's what we're doing today. I'm starting with a 6 by 6 inch cradled wooden board. There is a link to that and all of my other frequently used items in my description there. And you'll notice I put a coat of matte gel medium on that. That's Liquitex matte gel. I did that because the ink that I'm using tends to bleed. I did a test and I thought it might bleed off into the wood grain without that on it. So I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't going to happen. And setting down that coat of the matte gel medium will do that. So I have my little 6-inch gel plate there, and I spread out some paint and press down one of my artificial flowers. If you've seen any of my other videos, you probably have seen me do this before. This is a technique that I use in a lot of my work. I love the way these artificial flowers print. And what I am doing here is just cleaning up any of what I like to call the background noise that prints that doesn't lift up, like when you're pulling your lift up sheet off, because sometimes you can leave a little bit of paint on there no matter how hard you press that down. Just use a wet paper towel or shop towel and go ahead and clean that up. You can also use a piece of packing tape or something like that as well, but paper towels and water work perfectly fine for me, especially if you can still catch it when it's wet. That comes off perfectly clean. I do take a few extra minutes to make sure that this is done really well because I want these flowers to print pretty clear. So once I let that flower dry on there, I'm going back in with my matte gel medium. Now you can use gloss gel as well. I just use the matte gel because I don't know what kind of finish I'm going to want on it. So this way I can decide at the end if I want a gloss or a matte spray put on it. And this doesn't force me into making that decision ahead of time. So I spread some of that down, take my tissue paper, and this is just regular, not wet strength or anything. Lay it down on the top there. You see I laid a strip down, pressed my finger on it, and then I will slightly stretch it to make sure there are as few wrinkles or seams in it as possible. Sometimes I don't mind the wrinkles and seams, but when I'm looking to get an imprint of a specific subject matter like these flowers, I did kind of want to try to make sure that it was just the flower and not any extra texture in there. What I have there is just a sheet of copy paper. I like to poke a hole in it to put over the stem. That way I can make sure I get a nice flat press, and I'm just trying to remove some of the extra paint there. I repeated the same process several times. And I'm going to print several of these white flowers up. I wasn't sure exactly how many I was going to need or want, so I did end up having to print a few more up at the end there. My thought on this was to put a very subtle background in with these printed flowers. They're going to be very transparent when I lay them down. Normally I use gesso on my board, and I didn't want that. I wanted the wood grain to show through. Incidentally, when I put that matte gel medium down in the beginning there, you could use clear gesso as well, and it will do the same thing. I just only had the white gesso on hand, so that's why I used the matte gel there. Just in case you were wondering why I didn't do that, you absolutely could do that. So yeah, my thought is to get a lot of these flowers down. I want to do a couple of different colors. My initial thought was white and off-white and possibly a pale gray. But once I started setting everything down and thinking about it, I decided to pull some of my metallic paints out. Now, if you know me, you know I'm not really a big fan of metallics, other than possibly like maybe copper leaf, metallic leaf, something like that in some pieces. But I don't use a lot of metallic paint. But for some reason, the metallics were just speaking to me in this one, and I did a test piece, and it turned out really nice. So that's what I ended up going with. So once I have those flowers all printed out, I am hand tearing around some of these leaves. Some of them I do cut with scissors, but I don't really like the look of the hard edges that the scissors give, the perfectly straight cuts. I much rather have the hand torn look. It just appeals to me a little bit more. Now, this is very tedious. I have this speeded up here and it's still taking a little while. So this probably was the main part of time that it took me to complete this project. And don't worry, I don't film every single one of these. I just do one, I think, on here. But you get the idea. I printed up several of them and then I took them downstairs with me and I was tearing out the petals while I was watching TV at night. So that's kind of how I achieved that without driving myself totally crazy. But I do like the way it looks much better than just the cut with the scissors. This is some copper paint. This I got on clearance at Michael's. It was an Artist Loft product, but I think they actually discontinued that. But any metallic paint would work for this. Cutting my little hole there to put my stem through and just pressing that down. Just wanted to do one example of the metallic ones for you to show you what it looks like when it prints. Again, these are going to be very subtle when I collage them down to that wooden background, and that's exactly what I wanted. I didn't want it to stand out too much. I want you to be able to see what they are, but not be the main focus of the piece, because I'm going to be using a very stark black ink to do my image drawing on top, and I want that very intense contrast. Here's the print of the copper there. It's really hard to see on camera, but you'll see at the end when I put it down, it turned out really pretty. Once I had all of my flowers torn out, I started to collage them down. I actually did this a little bit out of order here. I ended up doing the collaging of the white flowers first, and then I decided to print the copper ones. I just edited that in there with the other ones in that order, just because it kind of made more sense with filming. But once I got these white flowers down, that's when I decided that the metallic ones would look really cool on there as well. I'm using some of my matte medium as my glue and just an old gift card to smooth that down. Be very careful when you're using your hard edge or gift card or whatever you use to smooth everything down, because any little appendages of these will very easily rip. It is just wet tissue paper and it will very much catch and pull off. But I do this step because it smooths everything down. You'll notice that I laid a coat of the matte medium down, laid the paper down, and then put another coat on top. That's just to make sure that everything is adhered really well, and then I just take the card to take any excess off. I have that little brush there. I'm just filling in a little bit more white paint on some of the petals just to make them stand out a bit. It's hard when you're working with white paint because, especially on such a light background like this, because it doesn't really pop very well. But again, I was going for subtle with this, so I think it all worked out really well in the end. After I got the white flowers glued down there, I went ahead and started placing the copper ones. I ended up printing a few more of each color just to make the balance and everything work a little bit better. And as I'm doing this, I'm starting to think about how I might want to finish it. I know I'm going to put the ink image on top. Part of me wanted to carry the metallics over and maybe do a copper leaf outline around the, not outline, but edge around the board. And I think that would have looked okay, but the decision I made in the end worked better. I would like to try that with the copper foil edging at some point. This just wasn't going to be the piece for it, and you'll see why once I get the ink down, that the decision that I made worked out a lot better. Just putting a few last touches on the flowers there. I did go in and trim the edges of anything hanging over the edges of the board, and I used some of those scraps to fill in along one of the corners there. You'll see in just a moment that's where those little tiny pieces are going to come from. It's not a whole flower, but it did give the impression of petals and a little bit more of the copper color in that bottom right-hand empty space down there that you'll see. It just needed a little bit of something, but I didn't necessarily want a whole flower on there, just a little bit of something to fill in that space. Again, be very careful when you're using your card or whatever you're using to smooth everything out, because it definitely is picking up some of the edges of those petals. I was able to put them back down with no problem, and because this is so subtle, you don't really notice it anyway, but just something to keep in mind when you are making yours. Once I get everything glued down, I'm kind of flipping the board around in every direction to see which direction I like better. I get in this habit of really just viewing the piece in the direction that I'm working, and sometimes that works out best, but sometimes I prefer something different, so give that a try. So I'm using some Bombay ink in black there, and that is just a wooden skewer. I tried drawing these with the skewer and also with a pen and nib on some sketch paper. Really liked the way that excuse me, that the skewer was working best, so I went ahead with that. Um, and this is where that ink would have bled possibly into the wood if there was any wooden pieces showing through. So that's why I went in with that matte gel medium and put that layer down in the beginning. I'm just doing some very loose and sketchy petals for flowers there. Obviously nothing super realistic. I just like the way that looks very much in the ink on there. And initially I went in and I had 4 flowers on there, and I liked the way that it looks, but odd numbers are always best when you're talking visually, something that is visually appealing. So once I did get this little guy down there, I went in and added another tall one to the top, and it kind of just balanced everything out a little bit better. And once those were all on there, I keeping track of which ink was still wet and trying not to drag my hand through it, which I did a surprisingly good job of. I just went back through and did sketchy lines over top of those lines. Some of them were a little too hard, and that wasn't the look that I was really going for. So I just went back in and added some more sketchiness to the lines. And I just love the way the contrast works with this. We've got that very subtle background with the white and the copper with this much contrasting, almost harsh black lines of the ink. Really love the way it looks. But you can probably see what I was saying before, where if I would have gone around the edge with the copper foil, yes, it would have drawn the copper from the flower prints out a little bit more, but I just felt when I was looking at it like it needed something a little bit darker to make the black kind of make a little bit more sense. For me, at least, it's very easy to get caught up in this part of it and not know when to quit. So I kind of have to keep myself in check when I'm doing things like this. And at some point, just stop and look at it and say, okay, is this finished? And, not allow myself to pick up the pen or the drawing implement or whatever I'm using anymore. So this was the point at which I did that, and I decided to sign the piece. And I used the pen and nib for that because while I was going to try to do it with the skewer, it was just going to end up being a blobby mess, I thought, and I think I made the right call. So I did decide to go in with black paint around the edges. I wanted a very, very thin black line coming up on the top of the board and also on the edge, which is how I typically finish most of my pieces. I'm using a very matte black paint there. I believe it's Saks um, brand. I have that linked in my description if you're interested. One thing to note, when you are using painter's tape to get a hard line, I always paint away from the tape. So I'll paint over top of it and away instead of up into where it is, where the seam is. And that might seem very obvious and common sense, but if that helps even one person, then it was worth saying. That just further helps any paint from getting up underneath the tape, which hopefully it won't anyway, but it worked out very well for me there. I had a moment where I was a little bit concerned, excuse me, that some of that tape might lift the collage if I didn't have it down well enough, but it was not the case. I waited for those first 2 sides to completely dry. It took me, I don't know, maybe like an hour or so, and then I repeated the process with the other side, and I think I got a really nice finished product. I don't often go into these pieces with an end goal, but I really do like this one and I have ideas for more. So we're going to do a little series of these until I get it out of my system. I guess that's typically how I run my serial work. I will make it until it feels complete to me. So we're going to make something else. It's going to be different next week, but along the same lines. I already have an idea in mind. So I hope you stick around with me for that. On that note, I do put out a new video every Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, so be on the lookout for that. And if you subscribe to my channel, hopefully they will tell you when I have a new video out. And if not, make sure you set your bell notifications there. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, and in just a moment I'm going to show you the finished piece. And here it is. I did spray a coating of triple thick acrylic spray on that because I thought it would look better shiny, and I'm happy that I did. And I don't know, let me know what you think. I am very pleased with this outcome. It's a little bit different than what I normally do, but not really because it has a lot of the same elements in it. So let me know what you think, and I look forward to working with you again next week. Have a great weekend.